Hello again, I'm John Terzak, and welcome to another video cooking lesson at the Seasoned Cook. Today, I'm going to show you and teach you a little bit about how to think about making breadcrumbs. I went out and bought a bunch of white bread, and what I did was I cut 2½ loaves of white bread because I have white breadcrumbs here that I made already this morning. And I'm going to show you exactly what I did. I cut all of the crust off of the bread before I took the bread and put it on sheet pans and dehydrated it in the oven. I cut them all like this, 1½ loaves, and put them on that, and I set them in the oven overnight and put it on warm for a little while, but mainly just dehydrated. It took about 5 hours. That was it. So what kind of bread can you use? Whatever kind of bread you want to use. You can use multi-grain whole wheat bread to make breadcrumbs if you want, or whatever. You can use dried bagels, you know what I mean? So quickly, I want to define the difference between breadcrumbs and breadcrumbs. The crumb of the bread is the interior white part of the bread. Technically, that's what the crumb is made out of. So what I did was, I'm making you some breadcrumbs, and then I have all the crusts, and I'm going to make some breadcrumbs with that also. But technically, in French cooking, breadcrumb is white. It isn't brown like we're used to seeing. Not a big deal, but worth knowing, okay? So let's get the toasted white bread in here, and then we're going to talk about flavoring your own breadcrumbs. And it's probably worth mentioning that the cost of breadcrumbs in the supermarket range from $3 to $5 a pound. And it costs between 25 cents and $1 a pound to make them yourself. So there is a substantial savings to making them yourself also. Now, the next question before you start the food processor is, how fine do I want my breadcrumbs? There's such a thing as them being too fine. I tend to like them more fine than other people, so that things that I bread have more of a finer crumb on them. So you can decide. You can stop your food processor when they're really rough and panko breadcrumbish looking also, if you want. Doesn't take long. Now I can stop there, and they're like a normal breadcrumb that you might buy in the supermarket. But in this case, I even have a couple of large pieces of bread left in there. I'm going to powder this or crumb this a little bit more. Okay, those are done enough for me. So let's dump that on there. And as long as we are in the mood, let's take some of the crusts that have a little bit of crumb left on them and do that so you can see the difference. Now, one might suggest or say, well, what difference does it make? It's all bread. And technically, I suppose it doesn't really make any difference unless you have a preference for what you want the crumb to look like on the food that you're making or using it with. So, you'll notice that even the color of these starts to look like regular commercial breadcrumbs. Okay, that's crumbed enough for me. Again, let's put these on the table. That's a little bit more of a rougher crumb than this one, meaning I didn't crumb it as much. So, now we have the question of making flavored breadcrumbs. You can make breadcrumbs flavored any way you want. I mean, I'm going to give you an example of an Italian version of breadcrumbs, because that seems to have caught on and is the most popular one, by taking a couple of handfuls of the white breadcrumbs. Now, would I make breadcrumbs at home? Yes, I do, but I don't season them or do anything with the large, what I would call the master batch. And as I need the breadcrumbs to use, then I flavor them if I want to individually. So, cumin, turmeric, and ground coriander to make a curry flavored breadcrumb. Or I'm going to add a teaspoon of dried oregano and a teaspoon of dried basil. And I'm going to add a teaspoon of dried parsley flakes, because you wouldn't want to put fresh parsley flakes in here because it has moisture and it would ruin your breadcrumbs if you stored them. And I'm going to add some powdered garlic, about a teaspoon. There you go. And you can put onion powder in here if you want also. I'm going to put a little bit of fresh ground black pepper and a little bit of salt. Mix it up, and there's your Italian seasoned breadcrumbs. But let's say you wanted to do like a Mexican style one. Maybe you'd put ground cumin and some hot chili powder and maybe a little splash of cinnamon in it. And you're going to use that to put on top of or coat something that's Mexican, and you want it to impart that flavor. The bottom line is, when you're making breadcrumbs, you make them the way you want, but mainly I want to get you out of the box of thinking that Italian seasoned breadcrumbs are the only seasoned ones out there, because you can put whatever you want in them. So, I hope I answered a question for you of how to make breadcrumbs and what breadcrumbs means technically, and a couple of different kinds, and the different types of bread that you can use. And the cost. This is a very significant factor, because making your own is at definitely 25% less of the cost of buying them. And let's face it, when you buy breadcrumbs in a store, there's all kinds of ingredients in them that you may not even understand or want in your body or your children's bodies. So there you have it. I hope, again, I answered the question of how to make breadcrumbs and have fun doing it, hopefully.